Real Story. Just a little over 1 month until Election Day. We're breaking down the latest poll numbers and taking an inside look at the latest conversation between governor's race challengers, Bob Stefanowski and incumbent Governor Ned Lamont. The races to watch, the issues on voters' minds, analysis all here this morning on The Real Story. And speaking of races to watch, the race for Connecticut's next treasurer is now an open seat. This morning, we're going to talk with the Republican candidate, State Representative Harry Aurora from Greenwich, why he believes he's the man for the job. It's all today on The Real Story. Good morning, and thanks for joining us on The Real Story. I'm Jen Bernstein. Well, the governor's race is heating up, and this past week, incumbent Governor Ned Lamont and Republican challenger Bob Stefanowski faced voters and business owners at an election forum. Fox 61's Emma Wolfhorst was there. Emma, what was the conversation between these two candidates like?
Yeah, Jen, the candidates answered questions about a variety of topics Thursday, from workforce development and tax relief to housing and transportation. This forum, hosted by the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce, comes after new polls this week show Lamont holding a 15-point lead over Stefanowski.
I'm a business person and a progressive, and I progressive in the sense that I think government can make a real difference in people's lives. And one of the first times in a long time, we have an opportunity to do that.
Whether you're Democrat, Republican, whether you vote for me or not, I owe it to you to support the hell out of you, and that's what we're going to do when we win.
The candidates at Thursday's forum painting two different pictures of the current situation in Connecticut. For Lamont, he focused on what he's done for the state in the last 4 years, highlighting job creation and 4 balanced budgets.
I've done everything I can to get people back to work. We had the biggest expansion of daycare and childcare in the history of the state. We're getting our fiscal house in order, and we keep our commitments.
Stefanowski, on the other hand, saying the state is unaffordable. People are out of work and crime is on the rise.
Now, if you honestly think it's safer than it was 4 years ago, and you honestly think the business community, it's easier to do business than it's 4 years ago, and you think that the infrastructure is better than 4 years ago, vote for the guy who's coming in next.
Neither candidate spent time on social issues like abortion or gun control, but Stefanowski took aim at recent attack ads running against him.
I'm a fiscal conservative. I'm socially moderate. I support a woman's right to choose. Roe v. Wade is codified in Connecticut state law. It's not going to change. You're going to hear attack ads for the next 40 days. And you know why? Because my opponent doesn't want to talk about the economy. He doesn't want to talk about the crime rate. He doesn't want to talk about parental rights. So put it aside and focus on the facts.
As I said, this forum came just a few days after new polls of likely Connecticut voters shows Lamont leading Stefanowski 55 to 40%, and a clear gender divide here in the state. Stefanowski continues to be unpopular among women. Female voters favor Lamont over Stefanowski 62 to 32%, while male voters are split between the two candidates at 47%. And we'll be seeing more and more of these conversations between candidates as we head toward Election Day, and polls really give us an insight into how these conversations are affecting voters. Of course, we'll be highlighting all the important races and hearing directly from those running here on The Real Story. Jen?
All right, Emma, thank you very much. And you know, there's just so much to talk about when it comes to these polls and what they mean for what candidates do next. And of course, races really heating up right now. Our next guest is here to help us break it all down. With us now, Professor Gary Rose from Sacred Heart University. He is the chairman of their Department of Government, a frequent commentator with extensive knowledge on not just the ins and outs of campaigns, but some real insight here into Connecticut politics. He's joined us many, many times before, over many years. Thank you so much for being with us once again on The Real Story, Professor Rose.
Good morning, Jen. Great to be here.
All right, so, let's start with those poll numbers. They do show Governor Lamont significantly ahead, but, we've seen polls get things very wrong in the past. How much should we be paying attention to these numbers?
Well, I think you do have to pay attention to these polls, and I'll tell you why, and that's because we have now 3 polls that are largely suggesting, even though there are some difference with the numbers, but they are suggesting pretty much the same thing. You know, you had the previous Emerson poll, you had the Quinnipiac poll, and now we have the Western New England College poll. All three polls are suggesting that Governor Lamont is substantially ahead of Bob Stefanowski. Now, if there was an outlier there, I would say, well, okay, you know, let's just look at these polls with a grain of salt. Maybe there's some inaccuracy. But Jen, when I see three polls, and one of which is rated extremely accurate over the past, stating largely that the governor has a major lead in this contest, then I have to say that Bob Stefanowski is probably in trouble in this contest.
Interesting. 5 weeks, still a lifetime in a candidacy, right? Things can happen. What are the chances that this could get turned around if we're just focusing on the polls?
Well, you know, also, if you look at the polls, many of the voters in those polls say they have made up their minds.
Right.
Now, you know, so I don't want to say that this election is already baked, and we do have a ways to go. What will change it? Spending on TV might be able to move voters in Bob Stefanowski's direction. And then, let's face it, a ground game as well. A very, very vigorous ground game could actually get his candidacy back up again to really challenging the governor. And one thing I need to say to your audience is that in 2018, when Bob Stefanowski ran the first time, he was substantially behind in the polling, but at the end he came within 3 points of winning that race. But at the same time, I would say, and I've been looking at these polls, the numbers should be somewhat concerning. I know that you know, men are evenly split. That's not enough. Men should be substantially in a Republican Party, in a Republican candidate's corner. Independents, actually, in the Quinnipiac poll, he did, if I recall correctly, he did pretty well among independents there, which is certainly to his advantage. But a big problem that he has in all the polls pertains to the women's vote. And women these days do vote at higher rates than men. And there is such a huge gender gap. How he is going to close that between today and November 8th, to me, that to me is a huge challenge.
Yeah, no doubt about that. You know, and also Bob Stefanowski from the beginning had a challenge on his hands because knocking out an incumbent Democrat in this state isn't an easy task either. Tom Foley tried to do it twice, right, with Governor Malloy, to no avail.
Yeah, I mean, he's up against an incumbent governor. And another thing I should add is that we are witnessing the real power of the incumbency here. The name recognition is higher for the governor. The governor is substantially ahead too in terms of getting resources together to manage this campaign and stabilizing his campaign as well. Bob Stefanowski's campaign lately has been in some turmoil. He had to change his campaign manager. He also had to change his media consultant. And then he had that debacle with the independent party, and he lost that lawsuit. You know, the last several weeks have not been positive for Bob Stefanowski's campaign. But getting back to the power of incumbency, yes, Lamont has more resources compared to Bob Stefanowski, a bigger war chest. But at the same time, you should also realize that the governor has been handing out a lot of things to voters to certainly generate more support for his reelection campaign. For example, we have bonuses going to private sector workers who worked during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. We also have tax rebates being given to families with more than 3 children. And then on top of that, we have all of this grant money being given to businesses that are in the what they broadly term the entertainment field, and that's what an incumbent can do. He can use state resources to actually. I'm not going to say buy votes. I'm not going to say that, but although the Republicans do make that claim, but he can use those resources to certainly generate a lot of goodwill.
No doubt, especially with the state's finances the way they are right now, with the rainy day fund overflowing and our coffers full. I say full, but obviously we know we have a lot of debt and a lot of unfunded pension liability that we have to factor into that. Okay, compare Bob Stefanowski's first go around, his first campaign, to what he's doing this time around. Are you seeing any changes? I mean, I'll tell you one change that I've seen. I feel like when you watch him talk, his message is very clear, and also he seems much more confident with his delivery. Like you can tell he's been traversing the state and talking with people, you know, for the 4 years that Governor Lamont has been in office. But what are you seeing when you're watching?
Yeah, well, you know, I wrote a book on the 2018 gubernatorial contest, and one of the problems I discovered with his campaign, that is Bob Stefanowski, is that he had somewhat of a strained relationship with the media. And I don't believe that he handled that very well with newspaper reporters and television reporters. And that was all new to him. This time around, I do see, and I agree with you, I see a much more confident Republican candidate running for governor, one who knows how to use sound bites more effectively, and one who certainly appears to be more confident even on stage. I watched him in the television debate that recently took place. And so I would say that that Bob Stefanowski is a much more polished candidate. He knows how to articulate, I think, his positions more concisely for the voters, and he knows how to really sell his message of tax reform, which, of course, is a big part of his campaign, more effectively. And he's using imagery a little better, too. You know, he appears in diners and he's with working class people, and I think he has a much more professional campaign going this time.
Sure, and we know those pocketbook issues are what a lot of voters are wanting to hear about this moment. Okay, quickly, we only have like 2 minutes left, but tell me your take on the U.S. Senate race with U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal and Laura Levy.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's another one that the polling data, certainly it's not favorable to the Republican candidate. You know, Leora Levy is a very conservative Republican, Trump endorsed, and that's how she won the nomination over Themis Claridis. And I'm not sure that she's able to shake that association, even though I know she's trying to walk it back a little bit. Also, her campaign, from what I can determine, is certainly nowhere near what Dick Blumenthal has in terms of cash on hand. I mean, it might be like 7-1 right now in terms of, you know, the campaign war chest. And also something else I've noticed, too, in her campaign, which to me is quite surprising. I mean, she ran a very, very vigorous primary campaign to win the nomination. But for all intents and purposes, she seems to have fallen off the radar since then.
Yeah, and I was just reading about something.
Yeah, and a lot of voters haven't seen her lately, and her name recognition is also very low. So you would think that at this point in the campaign, maybe she has a big October surprise coming. I don't know, but right now she just seems to have, for all intents and purposes, disappeared as a leading, you know, as a senatorial candidate here in Connecticut.
Interesting. Professor Gary Rose, always good to talk shop, as we say, with you about politics in our state. Thank you so much for coming on The Real Story this morning.
Okay, thank you, Jen.
All right, and among the candidates vying to get your vote, the race for state treasurer. Who is Republican Harry Aurora? We're talking to him about his vision to re-envision our state's finances next on The Real Story.